Hello, this is Dr. Anthony Fesmire. In this lesson, we're going to check out the intro, chorus, and breakdown sections of the song Oye Como Va. We'll go ahead and do one section at a time, starting with the rhythm, and then we'll add the chords. Alright, starting with the introduction, we just have rhythms that are quarter notes and pairs of eighth notes. The thing that makes this a little bit challenging, though, is that some of those quarter notes are quarter note rests, and some of the eighth notes are eighth note rests. If we check out the first measure just in terms of the count, we start off with two quarter notes, which will be counted as 1, 2. But then we have an eighth note rest followed by an eighth note. That is an eighth note pair. It will be counted as 3 and. We have the same thing on beat 4, eighth note rest followed by an eighth note. That would be counted as 4 and. So our first measure is counted as 1, 2, 3, and 4 and. But it's performed as 1, 2, 3, and 4 and because of the rests. In the next measure, we have a quarter note rest, counted as 1, followed by another pair of eighth notes where the first eighth note is an eighth note rest and the second eighth note is an actual eighth note. That is counted as 2 and. We have the same thing on beat 3, eighth note rest followed by an eighth note, 3 and then we have another quarter note rest, 4. So that is counted as 1, 2 and 3 and 4, but it's performed as 1, 2 and 3 and 4. Now if we string these two measures together, we have this: 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4. And that repeats 4 times. Now let's go ahead and check this out with the chord. I'm going to just go ahead and use down strums for this. And what you might do at first is just get used to the counting with the down strums. You do it with muted strings, not even worrying about the chord. And we'd have this: 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4. Now the chord is an A minor chord. Just going to come here and play our E form A minor bar chord. Could do the full chord. I could also play the smaller version of the chord with just the top 4 strings. And with that rhythm, it's this: 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4. That repeats 3 more times to get the introduction. Now the chorus section uses exactly the same rhythm and counting as the introduction, but it incorporates a D chord into the pattern as well. So what we do is we play the A chord for most of the first measure and then hit the D chord on the end of 4. So we get 1, 2, 3, and 4 and. Now we're just going to go ahead and play the D chord here in the A form. I'm not so concerned about getting this note on the high E string. I'm really focused on the notes in the middle. So I've got the note on the A string, which is D, and then the other 3 strings, which would be an A note, a D note, and an F sharp note. So that gives me enough for my D chord. So I'm going like this: 1, 2, 3, and 4, and. Get the D chord and then the 4, and then the D chord is what is played in measure 2. So 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So the whole pattern is this: 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Again, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Alright, let's go ahead and now check out that breakdown section. So for the most part here, we're still using quarter notes and pairs of eighth notes. We have the syncopated rhythm pattern a little bit later within this 4-measure structure. But we're going to go ahead and start with a quarter note, 1, then a pair of eighth notes, 2 and. Then we have another pair of eighth notes where the first eighth note is an eighth note rest. So we have 3 and then we have another pair of eighth notes, 4 and. So the count is 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and, but we rest on beat 3 for that eighth note rest. So we get 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and. For the next measure, we start off with another pair of eighth notes, with the first one being an eighth note rest, 1 and, then another pair but no rest, 2 and then quarter notes, 3, 4. So that is 1 and 2 and 3, 4 for the clapping. In the next measure, we again start with 2 quarter notes, 1, 2, but then we have the syncopated rhythm cell that is an eighth note, quarter note, and an eighth note. That single eighth note starts on beat 3. The quarter note is on the end of 3, 3 and. But that quarter note then holds over into beat 4, and then the last eighth note is on the end of 4. So I'm going to count that cell as 3 and 4 and, but I'm going to clap it as 3 and 4 and, because there's no attack on count 4. So that whole measure is 1, 2, 3, and 4 and. Then the final measure starts off again with an eighth note pair. It's an eighth note rest followed by an eighth note, 1 and, then a quarter note beat 2, and then we have a half note rest for beats 3 and 4. That measure is counted as 1 and 2, 3, 4, but performed as 1 and 2, 3, 4. All right, so here's the counting and clapping for the entire pattern. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, 3, 4. Now, before I put the chords with that, I'm going to go ahead and get really familiar with the counting, and I'm going to do this on just a down strum with muted strings. So this is what I get. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2. Once I've got that down, then I'm going to go ahead and add the chords. And here again, I'm only using the A minor chord and the D chord here at the 5th fret. So the first measure is just the A minor chord, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and. The second measure starts off with just the A minor, 1 and 2, and, but on beat 3 hits the D, 3, then back to the A minor on beat 4. In the third measure, we continue with A minor, 1, 2, 3, and then the end of 4, we hit the D, and then the last measure, we only do the A minor, 1 and 2. So it's a little bit tricky with a lot of fast movements between the A minor and the D chord. This is what that sounds like.